Thank you for bearing with us, everyone. Good afternoon to all, and welcome to another session of COVID Academy, which is in partnership with HCL Foundation and UNICEF. Today, as we all know, we have gathered, I'm sorry for that. As you all know, we have gathered to review the Union Budget 2022-2023 with context of CAA and disaster risk reduction. The context setting of the session would be done by Vikrant sir, who is the CEO of Sphere India. He will also be moderating the session. Before I go ahead and introduce all our panelists for the day to brainstorm on the topic, I would just like to go ahead and tell you how this session is conducted for those who are joining us for the first time. So there are two parts of this session. The first part is the discussion part, where the moderator where the moderator and all the participants will have a conversation. In the meanwhile, the participants who are watching can go ahead and type their questions, and we will ask them at the end of the session. Also, if you want to ask a question directly after the discussion, you can go ahead and ask those questions to us, and we will go ahead and try to answer those questions with help of our panelists. Okay, so with that, I would like to go ahead and quickly give a introduction to all of our panelists. If somebody can just give me a confirmation if my voice can be heard.
Yes, very much so. Clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhatt. Okay, so let's start with you then, Dr. Bhatt. So Dr. Mihir Bhatt is the founder and director of AIDMI, and he has been working in disaster risk actions and learning. He has published wide issues of vulnerability and disasters and has been a part of key evaluations of disaster response in Asia. At the moment, he is working with a number of states in regarding the same in disaster knowledge development and network. Next, we have Professor Anil Gupta, sir. Also, he is the head of Environment, Climate, and Disaster Risk Reduction for NIDM. Professor Gupta, sir, is a sustainable risk management strategist working in the area of disaster management, environment, and climate resilience for the past 25 years at national and subnational levels, also in business administration. Next, we have Dr. Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee, if you could kindly help me with your first name, sir. I would not... Tathagat. Okay. Dr. Tathagat Chatterjee is a professor in XIM University. His research interests are in urban governance, urban economic development, livelihood, and the likes. He has received a great award in... I'm sorry?
George Albers.
I'm sorry, sir. George Albers Award in 2016 from the International Society of City and Regional Development for his research on competitive mode of urban governance in India. Next, we have Ms. Lee McQueen. She is a senior program manager for NCDHR. She is a humanitarian professional with 16 years of experience. Her work comprises of designing and influencing policies, programs, and financial investments of social protection and equality-based DRR and CAA by the development of humanitarian actors and also by the government. Last but not the least, we have our very own Vikrant sir, Mr. Vikrant Bhatt. He is the CEO of Sphere India. Mr. Vikrant Mahajan, I'm so sorry. I'm a little nervous, my sir is here. So Mr. Vikrant Mahajan has 24 years of professional experience working with interagency policies and formulating humanitarian actions with the government, UN, corporates, CSOs, and armed forces in diverse contexts. He he also has a presence in government and policy level committees at several international organizations. With that, sir, I would like to hand over the stage to you, Vikrant sir, to give the context to the discussion today and moderate it.
Thanks, Ritika, and thank you everybody for joining this session. I think very timely when I think the budget is just being presented and discussion going on. The purpose of today's session we are looking at is the Union Budget 2022. Before this budget, the Prime Minister has made a big commitment at the UNFCCC COP regarding the climate change for India, the kind of a change we're looking in the next 50 years. And also before that, I think the National Disaster Management Plan of India, as well as the Asian Ministerial Conference, where we had the highlighted, the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda for DRR, again, a very well-articulated, well-planned document. But I think to both these big commitments and announcements we have to see how that translates it into action. And before we get into the action on the ground, how are we seeing these provisions in the union budget? So today's discussion, we are focusing on looking at the Union Budget 2022. What have been our aspirations to begin with? And from that, I think what is it that we feel that the budget is very promising in some certain provisions which are already included in that, and what is it that probably can be included and improved on, from where we could center our advocacy and other efforts with the finance ministry, as well as in the future with the finance commission also. So this has been the background and the context of this webinar. I will not say the entire context of the budget and budgetary planning. And today we have a very good set of experienced and distinguished panelists to take us through the discussion. So I would straight away dive into it to request Mr. Mihir Bhatt now is if he can share from his perspective, that what's the overlook on the Union Budget 2022-2023, and what does it mean for the humanitarian sector, for the climate and the DRR sector. Over to you, Mr. Mihir Bhatt.
Thank you. Just to get my voice clear. No, it's a great pleasure for me to be with Sphere India and the panel here to discuss this union budget. Since '96, every year, our lone voice, we've been sending suggestions for things that should be added in the budget. And here we are joining a much larger and powerful group of organizations and the network, which is making a point. So I feel very privileged and empowered, if that's the word, to actually do that. This year's budget is both from the DRR and climate change point of view, but we, all of us here, don't separate DRR and climate change adaptation from the development, because it's in the development pathway that this is happening. And I would like to point out certain additions and changes that will make this particular budget even more focused on DRR and climate change. First of all, the key feature, as Government of India says, is goals of Amrit Kal. And of course, we all want to go to Amrit Kal, and though we are mortals, but that Amrit Kal is also Afat Kal. And it seems the Amrit Kal conceived here is without Afat Kal. We would want it to be, but there are not many features in the budget which addresses this either directly or in a roundabout measure. So that's the first thing, that Amrit Kal, but lot of death due to disasters and climate change taking place. And that's something, an overarching concern that I would like to share. The second, and the way to go to Amrit Kal are three areas the Government of India has suggested. The focus on growth and all-inclusive welfare. And we all want growth, but it seems the growth is unprotected either from disaster risk or from the climate change. And that is something which needs to be addressed, because if one of the three goals doesn't lead us to Amrit Kal, we will not be reaching there. And it also says that the focus on growth and its inclusive welfare, and it seems that the welfare conceived here includes social protection, such as education, health, etc., etc. And I'm very happy to see that it doesn't necessarily addresses either social inclusion or social protection during the disaster periods. And I hope my colleague Lee would further highlight with examples and also directions on that, on the work that she has done in Gujarat after the cyclone. The second goal of Amrit Kal is for promoting technology-enabled development, energy transition, and climate action. And this is something a bit more complicated, so I'll leave it aside for the time being and go to the third goal of the Amrit Kal, and which is virtuous cycle starting from private investment crowded in by public capital investment. And as we know that the private investment in reducing disaster risk from relief, rehabilitation, recovery, reconstruction, or risk transfer is very, very limited. In fact, private sector doesn't come in at all. So here the whole situation is in reverse, that even the public sector resources are not coming in. Private sector is very, very reluctant, in fact, looking some other way around, and people themselves are funding their own relief, recovery, rehabilitation, civil society, and of course, Government of India's relief rehabilitation measures that took place. So the third wheel of this Amrit Kal also needs a bit of more strengthening and be more strong and robust to take us to this Amrit Kal. So that is in terms of the overall direction that the budget is going. And from disaster risk point of view, climate risk point of view, these are the reactions that that from us are responding. And the second part, and that's the last part, is the 4 priorities, as we know, the government has. And this particular budget is the PM Gati Shakti. And that's very important. It's not only mobility, but rate of mobility at which we want to move. And it so happens that during Afat Kal, during disaster period, and during the climate change related variations, the Gati and Shakti both become quite weak and interrupted. So the speed slows down, stops, as well as the energy with which this mobility is taking place, that slows down. So that is something we need to see in the budget now and subsequently. The second priority is inclusive development. And we know that if the development is not inclusive, the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation cannot be inclusive. And that is something we would like to see more. The third and fourth, so third is the productivity enhancement, investment, sunrise opportunities, energy transition, and climate action. And these are all very good goals, but how do you bring these goals into the relief, rehabilitation, and recovery so that the recovery leads us to enhance investments, sunrise opportunities, etc., etc. And that is not clearly provided in this. And the last priority, the fourth priority, is financing of investments. And there we find that direct investment in either DRR, humanitarian action, or climate change adaptation, that we would like to see at a scale and a variety which is not there. So that is my main response to the budget, that the goals of Amrit Kal needs to address Afat Kal within that and reduce Afat Kal as much as possible for the large number of poor population of our country. And the 4 priorities need to also think about the period where disaster risk and climate risk are directly addressed. Thank you. I have some specific recommendations which we can take up subsequently once the other panel members have also made their contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mihir Bhai. I think this the entire perspective with the addressing the Amrit Kal, addressing it in a way the Afat Kal brings it the 4, as you brought it along the 4 priorities, and within them, I think it's all about the aspect which touched base upon the disaster, the financing part of it, for the maybe mitigation and other the special vehicles which were required to be there, and that can be an aspiration, I think, from all of us for a long time. I think we have to see that some more empowering features coming up in the future budget of the Finance Commission. I think with this, I'll go to Dr. Anil Gupta now. And Anil ji, yes, I've heard you always saying that, how 75% of Indian districts are, hotspots for extreme events. And India has been losing, to the average $87 billion every year due to disasters. Now, how the union budget could have addressed some of these issues that we, can reduce some of these disaster losses? Can there be provisions within the budgets of various line ministries, and unto that, maybe to allocation of the states also? So I'd like to hear from you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Vikrantji. And I was listening to Mihir Bhai, and I'll be little literal in my response on the question. I totally agree with Mihir Bhai about the Afat Kal and all the projections that 1.5 degree or 2 degree projections all tell us that we are going to have more and more intense the episodes of these kind of Afat Kals. So that is almost for sure we have a high degree kind of a projections. Now, when it comes to reflection on the union budget, first of all, my compliments to COVID Academy and Sphere India for taking up this topic for this discussion, because this is a good beginning, and I think there should be larger discussions and all the platforms that how any kind of strategic interventions, any kind of financial decisions can help alter the disaster risk regime, whether it can aggravate the risk or whether it can reduce the risk, and how are we going to address different segments of the vulnerable populations and resources. However, when it comes to the budget, there are different segments broadly we can decide. One is like the part of the speech, the preamble speech, and then the parts where we get some kind of a strong action points like the action plan, and then what are the provisions and funds. So I have been listening to some of the discussions following the announcement of the budget on various other aspects also, and there has been this focus that what has been there in the speech did not reflect into action plan and did not reflect into the kind of provisions that have been provided. However, I would like to take this also in a positive notion that at least the discussion has started something on good aspects. So that is also important, and that and the kind of recommendations, then it also provides good avenues for future consideration, maybe next year budget or down the line. So this is very important. And as we all know that the country, particularly not only the country but the entire world, and more particularly our country, is in the stage of a major, I would say, that disruptive transformation. One in the field of technology, and second in the field of society. Both are going to transform like anything. The cities, the expansion of cities. So if we look at the kind of key issues that we are seeing, one is the technological transformation, and where part of the transformation is going to be driven by the energy related issues. And for that, the need to emphasize on green economy. I think budget has touched on it very, very significantly. Second aspect is social transformation. The kind of social disintegration that we are seeing, and in disaster risk management, we often try to focus on community-based mechanisms. And when the entire society is going to transform into cities, very shortly, most of the population would be living in different classes of towns and cities. So certainly the focus is on urban communities. So how are we going to address the issues of inclusiveness in the urban societies? I think that is very important aspect here. And as Mihir Bhai was also touching upon this issue of Afat Kal, basically there has also been a shift in the outcome of the Afat Kal. Now, basically the damage that we see is more in terms of economic losses, and that is because of the losses to infrastructure. So this PM Gati Shakti, we see the 7 main pillars that it is going to focus: roads, railways, airport, port, the mass transport issues, waterways, and logistics. I think if we utilize the opportunity when we are here, we are basically, the country is in a mood to provide a big boost to these 7 type of infrastructure systems. If we can integrate disaster resilience, that is a great opportunity. So certainly, we will need to look at that, how and what kind of tools and mechanisms to be integrated into planning and the implementation of these infrastructure systems, so that we can bring a kind of a mainstreaming. So I think very important. For example, just take example of road or highways. It is even a minor errors in the design of our highways can alter the hydrological regime, and then if the culverts are not properly planned and designed. So on one side it is water scarcity, and other side it is inundation and prolonged inundation, and there are not only floods but also the diseases are there, vector-borne diseases are there, and we have seen the kind of geographical spread of these diseases. Earlier, chikungunya, dengue were highly endemic to certain pockets. Now almost 2/3 of the country is under that. So I think there has been significant contribution of these kind of infrastructure, as we have promoted in the entire country, these kind of infrastructure. So we also need to look at that this infrastructure promotion, if we can make it disaster resilient and we can integrate the concept of disaster impact assessment kind of thing into an overall planning framework, so that can help reduce. Then similarly, railways, we all know. Then airports, like now Delhi is going to have another airport, JR airport, and any kind of big airport is a major modification or major alteration of the landscape, and big change in the hydrological regime. So if we start looking at proactively, we have seen the airport underwater in Chennai, the roof of airport blown in cyclone in Hudhud in Visakhapatnam. So having those kind of examples, if we consider this as an opportunity, and the disaster management professionals push on this, that whatever infrastructure under these 7 pillars we are going to promote, we ensure that those are disaster resilient. So I think that that would be good opportunity then. Then I would not be repeating. Mihir Bhai has already touched upon some aspect. But two more very important issues which have emerged here. One is that the country has requested UN to declare 2023 as the year of millets, International Year of Millets. So I think that also has some kind of linkage, because this year also we are going to have under the budget a lot of emphasis on direct transfer of money to people under various kind of the agricultural practices are there. Can we think that we evolve some kind of mechanisms that the people who are more into sustainable agriculture, or people who take interest in adapting to sustainable agriculture or resilient agricultural practices are given more incentives rather than others? So some kind of a motivation. And another one corridor that near Ganga, that is being promoted as a kind of a pilot or showcasing for organic farming. So certainly that is a good example. We need to transform most of the agriculture to organic, but at least a good beginning is there, and that is a kind of showcasing that we can use the legal mechanism, we can use the scientific mechanisms, and we can involve communities for promoting these kind of sustainability related issues. Then circular economy, there is a significant boost to this, and that is actually required also. Even if the Glasgow commitments of India, we see that those are achievable. Those are not very high, but those are significant and achievable, and that has reflected in our budget also. But there are 2 aspects which I thought that should have been focused adequately or even more in the budget. That is, one is on the preventive and social health. the entire world and country has also faced a major health challenge. There is significant focus on improving health service delivery, but service delivery comes later when you have challenge. So emphasis on reducing the risk, reducing the disease burden, reducing and improving the overall health of the people. I think that would that is also equally important, and that would be important for even reducing the burden on the health system also. So I think that is one aspect that I think our planners will have to look at this for the future. Then the budget has also reflected on urban capacity building. I think that is also very good opportunity, as I referred in the beginning also, that the world is going to be urbanized very soon. There is no excuse, there is no other way. Even we will have the name as villages, so this village, that village, but those will be some kind of urban centers only. So I think these are good opportunities. Last 2 points that I would touch, that the country has declared that we will get rid of single-use plastics by 2022. We had issued regulations also, but if we look at the execution, ground implementation, I think there are big questions. So how this budget addresses whatever we have already announced and committed to the international community also and to ourselves also. So I think that is one area I would like to point out. Last point, that in some of the countries, developed countries, we have a mechanism of the scrutiny of the policy decisions. Sometimes we call it the strategic environmental assessment, or sometimes we call it life cycle analysis, LCA. For example, recently we carried out a study that we are promoting solar power. So for solar power, then we are promoting PV cells, photovoltaic cells, and these cells contain heavy metals. And if those cells are located, those the solar cells are located in disaster prone areas, and if disaster struck those cells, and the waste that is generated from this, that is containing heavy metals, we do not have any policy regime in the country. We do not have any mechanism to get rid of those, whether we can recycle it, because that has a heavy cost also. So these kind of things, we can have tools like life cycle assessment and strategic environmental assessment that can also help. Like any kind of change that we bring, whether it will have the short-term, medium-term, and long-term repercussions on increasing or reducing the disaster risk as well as the vulnerability. So I think very important. And last point, what I would say, that now this is also the time that the future budget also start talking about the integrated risk approach. Now COVID has shown us that we cannot talk separately about health, separately about water, separately about environment, separately about disaster, separately about climate change. I think we will have to have an integrated planning framework for these key sectors which have very significant cross influences. So recently we are promoting a concept that we call it Vishesh. Basically, that is a vital, inclusive, safety, environment, sustainability, and health planning regime. So that is a framework planning concept that we are talking about. So thank you, and over to you, Vikrant, for taking this agenda forward. Thank you for allowing me to share some of my thoughts.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Firstly, for assuring that the budget has sufficient provision to look at our Glasgow commitments. I think that's big. And also touching base upon is where do we critically lacking in terms of a resilient infrastructure, and what are our other aspirations. But since Professor Anil Gupta is going to leave early, I'll give some moment to anyone if they want to ask a question while we are thinking about it, and maybe putting up in the chat box or the question across. Maybe I get back to you once again. These provisions which you are saying within the budget, and also what we see as our aspirational things, maybe which could be there in the future provisions, to say this. How can we have the Indian indicators, maybe on Sunday framework for DRR or on UNFCCC, through which we can monitor and measure the progress on these provisions? Can you suggest something on that? How can we have that kind of a process placed in India?
Vikrant, we already have the Sendai monitoring process that is going on. Along with that, the SDG monitoring is also going on. If we combine the two, I think most of the aspects are already covered. Only thing that how prudently we are able to mobilize the improve or the ground change at district and sub-district level. I was talking to my senior colleagues at various authorities also recently, that we have very good policies and now we have very good plans also at national level. But the challenge really where we see if we go to district, we find very uneven situations. There are some districts we will find very good understanding, very good development and very good outcomes also. But there are very bad examples also. We have good and bad both. So how do we work with those who are lacking on the capacities? So I think that is important. And certainly criticism is possible. The weaknesses may be possible. There are rooms for improvement. But whatever there in the budget this year, I think we have adequate opportunities to work. As I told, that 7 pillars of this Gati Shakti, I think there is a huge window of opportunity. But only what will happen if we do not have the proper mechanisms to integrate adaptation and risk resilience into these developments. The developments will already take place, and then later we will have to think of corrective measures, which are not always possible, and the loss is already done. So I think that is the reason we are talking about the DIA integration to EIA mechanisms, like so that planning phase itself, and that will be, and then those measures would be more cost effective also. So I think this is one thing. Second thing, what I would say, that the conventional type of budgets that we used to have earlier, and now few years, actually it is not only India, the world is transforming. It is the world is, even the economy is transforming. Even the report of 2017, we recall, some institution in America, that the economics failed the economy. So even the principles of economics are now also being revisited, revised, because the conventional GDP, I think the conventional GDP concept, now we are talking of the green GDP approaches. But this transition, I think that is not that easy. And the country is basically also in the stage of dichotomy. On one hand, we are trying to think that we revive our economy and we become a superpower or a big power, a leader. But on the other hand, we still have a lot of villages to be provided with the drinking water. We still have the pockets of malnutrition. We still have the shelter to be provided to many people. So India is a country where we have very good examples also, and we have high aspirations to grow economically also. So we have to boost our private sector, but on the other hand, we have to ensure inclusiveness also. So the monitoring mechanisms and the local level planning has to be seen that way.
Thank you so much, sir. Actually, I wanted it more like that, only what you are suggesting in the end. I think thanks for sharing that there is the planning happening on the progress on the SDGs, including the Sunday indicators localized to Indian context. I think we can also harmonize the Glasgow and the UNFCCC commitment in that, so that we have one single framework. But more importantly, what you said towards the end, sir, how can we make it more inclusive and participatory, so that this monitoring is something we demonstrate as a whole of a society, monitoring it, and whole of society working together onto it. I think while putting some other perspective with Mr. Mihir Bhatt a couple of days back in another discussion, he was also suggesting that we should look at that this webinar, today's discussion, is not just one in standalone, but we make it a continuous process. And I certainly make a strong voice for this particular aspect, that how we see moving forward, we make it a more inclusive and participatory monitoring on a single framework for single localized, adapted framework for all the three of them integrating into one. So thanks for that. Is there any question, Ritika, in the chat, or anyone among our participants before Anil Gupta, sir? We lose Anil Gupta as he has to move to something else. Any question from participants for him?
We do have one to all the speakers.
Yes, we can take on that first, maybe. Okay.
Apart from conventional manners of dedicated budgetary allocations, can government tend towards innovation and innovation mechanisms to generate funds for DRR and CA through financing strategies? If yes, then suggest how with examples.
Yeah, so should I respond to this before I leave?
Yes,
Sure,
sir,
sir.
please.
So I think this is very important point that has been raised, and in India, in fact, a good initiative is there. Two good initiatives. One is that we have a concept of Flexi Fund, that all centrally sponsored schemes, 25% of the money can be spent for DRR related interventions. But here again, what is the challenge? That yes, provision is there, but not all are aware that how do we really use that? How do we further plan to use this money, that 25% of money of the centrally sponsored scheme? So there is a provision also, but there is a capacity gap that we have to address. Second thing, if we recently this year's guideline, earlier we had this National Disaster Response Fund and National State Disaster Response Fund, SDRF and NDRF. Now this money has been further, the budgetary allocation has been modified, and now part of this money is also available for mitigation and preparedness related purposes. So mitigation, early warning, and preparedness, including capacity building. So it also leverages the resources for adaptation related activities also. So these are two examples. But there are other mechanisms. For example, we have National Adaptation Fund, and just now we are working for a pilot project for 3 states, Gujarat, Himachal, and Odisha, to develop demonstration models that how some of our critical infrastructure can be made resilient to climate risk as well as the disaster risk, and then to see that how the conventional budget can incorporate these components, the departmental budgets. So these are the opportunities. Then even we're also discussing that how CSR can leverage support. So there are a number of ways we are trying to explore. So but this point is good. So thank you for pointing out on this, and other panelists can also add to this issue. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Open to other panelists.
Yeah. So Vikrant, would you allow me?
Thank you, sir.
In fact, I will be. I didn't want to leave because this is such an important discussion, and I'll be listening. In fact, I will be listening on my mobile while driving back also. So I would be keen to listen to all the panelists and all the question answers also. So my apology, I am not able to stay here. Yeah.
Anil bhai, we will miss you. But what I think the point on this Glasgow thing that you have mentioned, so I think that whenever discussion is over, maybe remotely, but if you bring in that part in a more detail, that would be very useful.
Yes, Mihir bhai.
We will miss you.
Yes.
Sure. Thank you, sir. We'll stay in touch on the next part of the processes. But any other panelists want to address this question first before we move ahead with our plan structure? Dr. Tathagat, do you want to address this question?
Maybe after I talk, we can revisit the point at the end.
Sure. So moving forward, then I go to our next speaker is Miss Lee McQueen. She is the Senior Program Manager for Inclusive and Equitable Disaster Response and DRR at NCDHR. So Lee, the question to you is, how can disaster reduction be institutionalized in the union budgets to mark the shift from the contingent liability approach of public financing to a risk management approach? And what are the ways to include budgeting for risk-informed programming, and why it is required? In fact, Lee has led a very interesting process, just before the budget on behalf of Sphere India and Sphere India governance. She steered a committee and developed a draft of list of recommendations for the finance ministry to consider. So Lee, over to you. We'd like to hear from you on this question and whatever else you would like to take us through the important subject. Over to you.
Thanks, Vikrant, and good evening, everybody, and the co-panelists. It was wonderful to get an overview of the budget from the DRR and climate change adaptation points of view from both Professor Anil Gupta and from Mihirji, and other panelists will also address that. So because we have such vast understanding of the union budget, the government of India's budget on DRR and CCA, I would like to just also try to answer what you have asked as to how to institutionalize the DRR and climate change adaptation into our budget exercise in the country's budget. Sharing that overall the budget, I think it's a great initiative that this is the first time we are having a discussion in this. All the social sector and other civil society organizations, they brainstorm, they debate, and they analyze, they examine the budgets every year from different aspects, different perspectives. And for us, it is a milestone, that we are today discussing about the DRR and CCA in the union budget, in the union government's budget. So I would like to say that, first of all, it's important that while all that has been said is great, and we really do see a progression in the budgets every year, especially with, when I see the MHA, the Ministry of Home as the nodal authority for disaster management, and Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change for climate change adaptation. The responsibility, however, is not just confined to these two ministries. So it can only be mainstreamed and institutionalized if all the other ministries, they review their programs, because the policies, they get translated into government schemes then get funding, and funding has to be from various sources, public, private, both. So I think the mainstreaming or the institutionalization can only happen if all the ministries, if we look at the National Disaster Management Plan, there also we have the stakeholding of various ministries and commissions. So they also need to look at their programs, the schemes that they're running, and see how it is really building adaptive capacity of the people who are being, who are really facing disparate impact of disasters due to extreme climate events year after year. Last year itself, we had 3 mega, cyclone events, Tokte, then we had this Yas, and there was one more, I think Gulab. So there are so many events that are happening at a small scale and large scale both. So it's important that we rationalize. Budgeting makes sense, like, to understand what, I will not say that, okay, today, this time the Ministry of Environment and Forest has allocated 3,030 crore of its budget to climate adaptation, or the Ministry of Home has allocated this so and so amount. Actually, those digits need to be unpacked. We need to rationalize what kind of schemes are we getting from these ministries. Are they really going to build resilience? And this can only happen when we base our exercise of budgeting through socioeconomic and locational vulnerability profile of the areas, the regions which are so exposed to climate change events that are happening and disasters. So that's one thing. And secondly, a very good practice in the country that we have is something like child budgeting, gender budgeting, and this also happened over a period of time. And this is a great practice. And in the same spirit, we also need to see how much of the GDP, or forget about the GDP, how much of our commitment, we have the COP26, or to say UNFCCC commitments are there, or the Sendai framework is there. We really need to see how much of all the budget that's really coming in for these schemes is enhancing resilience, and at the same time looking at bettering the public infrastructure, public services. We see in this overall budget, last year there was a spike in social security projects, programs of the government in social sector spending because of COVID, especially after the first wave. But this time there is a lull there. It's like really come down. So for disaster risk reduction to happen and climate change adaptation to happen, we also need to see that our social sector spending is going up and it's not coming down. So I think that is also another very important area for our advocacy with the government, that one, whatever programs these ministries are running, not just the MOEFCC and the MHA, but even other ministries and departments, there has to be some synchronization, harmonization. They need to see what's there from the climate change adaptation lens, and how is it going to reduce the risks and exposure and vulnerability of the region and of the people living in those regions. So, and then we talked about the indicators here. You mentioned about the Sendai framework indicators, the global indicators. We definitely need to Indianize them, because we have something which Niti Aayog has done, for SDGs. We have now national development indicators. A similar exercise needs to happen, because I'm not very sure how well we are doing. And these indicators are so vast and larger than life, I would say, that we are missing out on people. We are missing out on how are we reducing vulnerabilities of the people living in hazard-prone and highly exposed geographies. And there are schemes like Project Tiger, Project Elephant, then hazardous substance management, the National Coastal Mission, ECO. So all of this, much of the money is going towards capital expenditure. But what exactly is happening when we are talking of resilience? Building human resilience also, that's equally important. And to conclude, I would say that I don't have to mention about the Ipcc predictions, how they have projected the dangers, the risks for future. Everybody knows here, the 6th latest report of last year. We really need to base our exercise on mapping the vulnerabilities, the human and non-human, both vulnerabilities and exposure to these risks, and then do the budgeting. And I think that is only possible when we don't limit ourselves in our dialogue with MHA and MOEFCC, but we also take it up with other departments, because the National Disaster Management Plan has given them a role there. And there has to be some monitoring mechanism to see what are those targets, how are we working towards reducing vulnerabilities, and how is it that we are building resilience. So I think that overall, I wanted to just put this budget into a perspective that we need to see how people are getting better, the public services and infrastructure is getting better. And that's the only way of mainstreaming it, when we are doing it across the ministries and departments, and not just the two ministries doing it. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Thanks for bringing up the important aspect that it's not just the two ministries, but it's across all the ministries. Maybe at the topmost level, the commitment need to come down. I think within the NDMA, the committee, the top level committee of all the line ministries, perhaps, I think where there's a provision in the act that this committee need to look at this aspect, maybe at the highest level, secretary level engagement. Perhaps I think we need to see that mechanism need to work more. And equally important is on the lines of the way Niti Aayog has adapted and Indianized the indicators. I think we steered an exercise by which we the Sunday indicators as well as now the UNFCCC indicators can be Indianized, made it simple, or probably made all three can be harmonized, and we work together on that. This is one agenda. Surely we all can work together with NIDM and other institutions. So thanks, Lee, for putting it into perspective here. I'll go to our next speaker, who is the Dr. Tathagat Chatterjee. He is a professor on urban management and governance at Xavier Institute of Management, University Bhubaneswar. Sir, how do you see that the budget talked about capacity building in the urban local bodies? What skills and competencies would be required in the urban local bodies to for addressing some of these provisions, and how can climate actions and disaster management process be mainstreamed in the urban local bodies? So yes. Over to you, Dr. Tathagat. You can also add anything else from your perspective. Over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Vikrantji, for having me here. It's really a pleasure to share my views in this August panel. Now, while talking about the budget, about the issues of climate change and the disaster risk reduction, I would focus mostly on the urban dimension of it, because we know that the cities are really at the center of both the concerns. The point that was being made out by Professor Anil Gupta also. Globally speaking, the cities account for 80% of the global GDP and about 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So, as Mr. Mihir Bhatt was mentioning about Amrit Kal and Afat Kal, so both actually really converge at a city level. So whether we have the Amrit Kal or the Afat Kal, both would be actually determined how we shape our urban transition. And in that sense, I would like to very much congratulate the finance minister, because in one of the very important points she mentioned in the budget is that India is going to reach 50% benchmark urbanization level in next 25 years. Yes, actually in the year 2046, India is supposed to reach the 50% urbanization level. That is if we measure by the census definition. But I mean, there are also questions about the census criteria, because Indian census criteria, how we measure urban, is much more stringent compared to other countries. So if we follow Mexico's definition or China's definition or the World Bank definition, we have already crossed 50% long back. So if we look at the nightlife data of urbanization, India is already 50% plus urban. But nevertheless, I mean, in the budget, the issue of India's urban transition has received a high amount of emphasis. So that is definitely the good part of it. The question is, how do we adapt to the green transition in an urban areas? And that is where the key of the challenge lies. And in a way, I mean, we can divide the budget into two ways. One part of the budget, it is talking about the future agenda, climate proofing India, the aspirational part for the next 25 years. And the second part, it's about the very immediate concerns, what is the amount of the fund that is being allocated to different heads and different central programs. Now, if we focus on the aspirational part of the program, part of the budget, what we see that, I mean, there is a very strong emphasis on climate actions and also on attaining some of the sustainable development goals, the SDGs. So if we look at the issue of sustainable development goals in a governance paradigm, in a global governance paradigm, there is a policy triangle here. That is between the how do you resolve the conflicting dimensions between efficiency, equity, and the ecology. And the Sustainable Development Goals framework is kind of a trade-off between all three of concerns to arrive some kind of a middle ground. So, how does these things play out in an urban context? Here, there are certain points that we need to take into consideration. One of the key economic objectives in the budget, it's about laid out, it's about the point Mr. Anil Gupta has also mentioned, it's about the PM Gati Shakti, which is a very high priority scheme for the government of India. The second, it's about asset monetization pipeline. We had been talking about the issue of asset monetization pipeline. Now, these are both these airports, railways, ports, etc., which are part of the PM Gati Shakti initiative, and also asset monetization pipeline, which are about how to capitalize the dormant assets lying with the public sector companies or different government agencies. These big ticket infrastructure projects, what would be their environmental footprints and how we are going to mitigate those, particularly at a local level? That remains I would say, the elephant in the room. That remains, the big question, how do you negotiate that? Because there is no one answer to that. India is too complicated a country, and then again, much of these things would actually vary from state to state, city to city. Because in India, we also have high degree of variation in the governance capacities of the states. So how these points emerge or play out on the ground would depend on many of the state level factors. So the central budget in that sense can put an aspirational agenda, but how that agenda will be traveled would vary from different state to state, and even within the state from region to region. There are also concerns about the equity aspects about this environmental big ticket, particularly big ticket infrastructure projects regarding land allocation and resettlements. So far, our track record in many of these schemes had not been very exemplary, and so land allocation, resettlement of people remains a major area of concern. Now, city level, the cities are going to face enormous pressure on this point, because if we also look at the budget along with the 15th Finance Commission recommendations, so 15th Finance Commission has also pumped in a lot of money to the urban sector. Now, when we talk about the urban sector, we usually talk it into in 3 Fs: funds, functions, and functionaries. Now, suddenly, a lot of funds have started moving into the urban sphere, but the question remains on the second 2 Fs. That is about functionaries and about functions, because most city governments in India are very weak. So the most urban governance decisions are actually carried out not by the city level bodies, but by the state level parastatal agencies. So here there is a conflict how the 3 aspects are going to be managed at a local level. Now, 15th Finance Commission has also made an interesting distinction this time. So while allocating funds to the urban sector, it has made a distinction that a certain amount of funds that would be coming to the urban sector are performance led. That is for the top 50 million plus cities. And for the smaller towns and the medium-sized towns, it is more of a direct grant. Now, when it comes to the performance aspect, how the cities are going to measure their performance when they do not have the adequate level of capacity? How they are going to achieve their economic targets regarding asset monetization if they do not have the power to do so. So whether that is going to set in motion the race to the bottom to convert land and water bodies into real estate asset. So how we are going to tackle that issue, that remains a question. Here in India, we had typically been very poor in terms of urban planning capacity. In that sense, it is very interesting that in the budget that the finance minister has talked about enhancing urban planning capacity. And this, that is, I think, a single most important issue that the finance minister has talked about. So that would lead to a very structural change, improving the urban planning capacity. But we have to see how that really translates on the ground. So the objective is really very good. And regarding your question, how do we make climate change and disaster risk reduction part of our mainstream this as part of our urban planning framework? Here also, to mainstream both climate change and disaster risk reduction as part of our urban planning framework, we need to strengthen our urban planning system as a whole. Presently in India, we have about 4,000 statutory urban local bodies. Now, out of these statutory urban local bodies, only 1/3 of them has got a master plan. and most of the master plans are not very active documents. So they are mostly, land use control documents, which which are not reflecting the current reality. In most cases, they are very obsolete. And so the master plans has to be more nimble and more, they needs to be updated more frequently. They need to address the current situation. In that sense, I think, one initiative that is NIUA has started, that is Climate Smart Cities Initiative. That is really a very important step. And that is another important step would be localization of the sustainable development goals at a city level. So city level localization, not a national level, but at a particular state level SDGs alignment. Here in Odisha, we are having this, is that the state budget is also being aligned with the SDGs. But we need to have a city level alignment. And here also, I think the the Niti Aayog recently came up with a city level SDG for the first time. I think that is really a very important step to move forward. But also we have to keep in mind that this is for the first time we are measuring many of these indicators at a city level. So the measurement capacity also does not exist. And the measurement parameters also do not exist. So we need to focus on those aspects. But some good beginning has been made. One of the cities like Rajkot has very recently come out with a heat action plan. Surat is well known for coming up with a disaster management plan. Some of the, in Kerala, this is part of the planning framework, that there is a district level disaster management plan, local level disaster management plan. So these are some of the good practices, but which needs to now percolate down to other states, to other cities. So I think, both of these questions, the climate change and the disaster management, and integrating that at a local level, has to be addressed somewhat as a federal question. It is how do you address these in a multi-level governance framework? What the intentions between the national level priorities, how does it translate to state level priorities, and how does it ultimately link to the urban local body where the final implementation happens? So unless we strengthen the bottom of the pyramid, that's the urban local bodies where the real action happens, then rest of the things would remain more of an aspirational goal rather than translating into practice. So I would stop at this moment here, and if there are more questions, I would be happy to take it up.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tathagat, for sharing your insights. Specifically, I think with your experience, to these urban centers, the cities, and urban local bodies. I think I come back to maybe another round of questions, a single question to all the panelists. But before that, is there any question from the participants? Ritika, anything in the chat, or anybody would like to raise a question?
Not at the moment, sir. But however, I have a question for Mr. Tathagat, if he would take it. He mentioned the state level SDGs. I would like to know a little more about it, as to how they have been successful and how we can implement it at state level and ask them to go ahead, and how is a top-down structure?
Yeah, so for past few years, since 2018, the Niti Aayog, which is the national level monitoring agency for state monitoring for the SDGs, had been monitoring performances of different states. Regarding out of the 17 SDGs, 15 are being monitored, 2 are not being monitored. One is, I think, the SDG regarding life below water, and the one SDG 17, which is about international cooperation. So these 2 are not being monitored. The other are being monitored. In what is happening in case of Odisha, and I think also it is there in the case of Maharashtra also, that state budgets are being aligned to the SDG goals. So because the beauty of the Sustainable Development Goals framework is that, I mean, for each of the goals, there are a number of indicators. And each of the indicators has got different targets. So monitoring these indicators and targets are designed for higher level decision making in an objective manner. So the policy decisions could be evidence based. The question here is about availability of data. Now, in case of when it is a measurement is about a parameter of a national mission. Say, for example, a water supply scheme like Jal Jeevan Mission or Amrut. So then the parameters are nationally equitably laid out. So then the getting the data measurement becomes easier. But when it comes to local level measurement, there the problem is in most cases, the measurement parameters, we had not been collecting this data at a city level. Some of these data are being collected at a district level. Some of these data are being collected at a state level. Some of these data are being collected at an urban local body level. Very few are actually being collected at an urban local body level. But when it comes to final decision making, in the city level indicators are particularly important because in SDG framework, we have SDG 11, which is being for the first time it was put in place because the world at large is moving towards an urban future. And SDG 11 it's a kind of a catch-all frame SDG, because it has got a very high degree of interface with practically each of the other SDGs. So that is the point, is that by controlling the development at a city level, you make the maximum impact. But here the point is we had not been collecting so much data at a city level earlier. So and now the beginning has been made. And here also another interesting beginning has been the National Urban Governance Framework that has also been brought out by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs under the Smart Cities Mission. It is a work in progress, so very soon that would start getting propagated. So I think within a short time, we have made a lot of achievements in having the data availability. So that is an important feature for the next steps.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Tathagat, Dr. Tathagat. Maybe my last question, I come back to the panelists, is, I think it's a very interesting discussion. Some really good insights come up from, but where do we go from here? So what are your final recommendations as the next steps from here? Not just on the budget, but also for us as a process to take it, to move forward on these discussions. So Mihir Bhai, will you like to come in first for that?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. And I'm very glad we had Tathagatji, the way you presented the urban role, but also in a larger context of the urban is very useful for Sphere India and all of us to move ahead. And Lee, you also brought in the aspects of both expenditure and social spending, etc. So combining the two, I'd like to make 4 recommendations, which are product related as well as the process. And the first one is to say that the Sphere India needs to make the budget and the process more risk aware, in a sense that there are large parts of budget which believes that there is no such thing as risk. And I think we need to gently and with respect, but firmly point out that Gati Shakti is exposed to disaster risk and climate risks, for example. So we need to make sure that even the latent mention are highlighted and made articulated to face the fact of cyclones, floods, and heat waves, for example. And we can't continue to believe that these are just shocks come now and then, and economy and the budget is not so much affected from that. That's not going to be, and definitely not since the IPCC reports one after the other, and since Glasgow, it's very clear. Also within that, the awareness need to capture the state-to-state diversity and disparity that Tathagatji mentioned in terms of cities, but we can look at in terms of state as well. And we need to look at also the pandemic has offered multiple challenges in reviving India's economy, and the recovery that is taking place from the recent last 5 or 10 years disasters has also slowed down, and budget needs to address that, especially recovery for the small and medium enterprise sector, quality jobs, for example, and that has slowed down or is non-existent. Migrant income, for example, who are affected by disasters and climate change, and spending on health and education that Lee so firmly argued. So I think the feeling, the expanding, and also the feeling of expanding digital divide that has continued to play the role even during and after the initial response for the pandemic. So that's one sort of recommendation. They make the budget more DRR CCA sensitive, and that process is itself quite an exercise, and Sphere can do that. The second part is AIDMI also thinks that the budget needs to finance risk reduction and resilience building. So financing and allocations for risk reduction and resilience building need to be more explicit and direct. Unless money is put into heat wave plans, for example, coastal cyclone programs, for example, safer shelter projects, for example, the risk impact will continue to rise. And that is something we need to argue if we decide to move ahead, which I hope. Budget must also match investment financing with project response readiness financing in areas such as Sundarbans Delta, for example, because a lot of DRR and climate projects are not really so easy to conceive in the given situation. So project response financing is also needed, and budget must also accelerate the efforts to financially leveraging and to attract the private investments, because only public investment is not going to help. And also promote local resource mobilization, which Tathagatji said localization, but not only of actions and decisions, but also resources to do that. And co-financing, especially the coastal metro cities such as Bhubaneswar, for example, Bombay, for example, etc. So that's a sort of second set of second recommendations with the detail. Third and fourth. So the third recommendation is that the IDMI suggests that budget will think of decentral flow of funds to local actors. And from the sphere point of view, it is decentralization or localization. And from sphere point of view, it is localization. From the budget point of view, it is decentralization. And we suggest that the union funds flow to strengthening collaborative federalism, as was suggested, Vikrant Bhai, if you remember, at the Sendai by Government of India, so clearly and so eloquently, and allocate money to the states to reduce risk and building resilience in the areas affected by, for example, floods, droughts, cyclones, and agriculture failure, not to miss out on that. And within that, in addition, the budget must pinpoint its financing partnerships, that who will this budget financially partner with, which may include governments, its multilateral financing institutions such as World Bank and ADB, and commercial organizations, large number of them which do investment. So we think the time has come for the budgets to go both and set up DRR financing, and as well as to go beyond through loans and grants and technical assistance and other financing, including risk transfer arrangements, parallel loans, for example, equity and guarantee co-financing, and co-financing per se for co-benefits. So that's the third area where we can take both product-related as well as the process-related actions. And the fourth one, and the last one that I would like to suggest, is that the budget to build on more anticipation and preparedness measures. And that's where all DRR and humanitarian action is going in anyway. AIDME suggests that the budget funds pilot projects and programs to try out activities such as direct cash transfer. And it's mentioned there in the budget, just that it doesn't mention that it should be done during the disaster situation as well, clearly and directly. Cash transfer, coastal preparedness, for example, or urban resilience. We heard a lot about that from Tathagatji, and at a national level. So what India needs to fund via its budget is resource-efficient response recovery, and that is not taking place. Leverage private financing for risk reduction. Pilots in climate-smart initiatives with co-benefits and similar activities and initiatives. So that's what India needs to fund via its budget. And two additional areas which budget can address, and they are, first, investments in addressing unending gender gap in preparedness. And right now, broadly speaking, the male population, male citizens of India are relatively better prepared when they are than the women are, and that cannot be continued anymore. And second, the investments in high impact technology in public and community interest. So how the new technology that is coming up in the other areas will include the community aspects as well. So let me sum up and say that these four areas, the union budget must offer allocations for transformative DRR initiatives, including resilient infrastructure provision, economic and social services that Lee so kindly mentioned, and underpinning capacity for low-income states, such as the Northeast, but not only Northeast, to make India safer. Thank you, Vikrant Bhai. These are my suggestions for Sphere to get engaged immediately with the budget, but also the budgeting as a long-term process if you decide to do so. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mihir Bhai. And Lee, do you want to make the final recommendations moving forward?
Yes, Vikrant. So moving forward, I believe that we as Peer India need to engage more with the Finance Commission and the Finance Ministry and put forth our position as to what resilience really means for people in India. And Mihirji has just mentioned about the low income states. And I will say focusing also the low income groups. And we have more than sufficient data on the low income groups. If we look at the social and economic census data, the agricultural census data, and the population census, we just have a huge variety of vulnerability profiling in our country, be it region-wise or community-wise. And as I had mentioned, I would like to underline again that this practice of gender budgeting, child budgeting, and also in the country for many years, and recently in 2017, the Niti Aayog has also revised the guidelines for specific exclusive allocations made for the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities in India, given their socioeconomic, educational underdevelopment and backward condition, the situation in which they've been living. So these norms are called, these revised guidelines are called the Development Action Plans for SCs and STs. And coming from this organization where I work, and for so many years, over 15 years of work, focusing on the vulnerabilities of the Adivasi and Dalit communities, it has shown that any event, any disaster that happens in the country, they are the people who are first impacted and most disproportionately impacted. Obviously, because they do not have land, they do not have development resources. So what do they fall back on? What kind of development and rebuilding are we envisioning for such communities? So I think it's very important we focus this DRR and CCA perspective into these exclusive funding mechanisms within the government of India, as well as the general schemes and the programs, the flagship schemes, and the central sector schemes where 100% allocations and implementation has to be done by the union government there, as well as those where there is state and center sharing, centrally sponsored schemes. They need to really buckle up, and they need to see who are the beneficiaries, who are really benefiting from these schemes, and increase allocations there. And secondly, another important aspect is, as peer, if we can really also institutionalize this exercise of examining the budget in the country every year. One is to put forth our position, another is to really see what is the budget really bringing to the table, for the people of India, and see if we can really continue this exercise and engage more and more towards making it more risk informed and having that risk governance integrated into this. And lastly, I would say disaggregated database is very important. The government of Odisha, and I believe maybe other states as well, but Odisha certainly has a climate budget. At the union level, it is very difficult to track the allocations because it's, as I said, it is not just the two ministries, MOE, FCC and MHA, that are making allocations, but it's the money is parked under various schemes with various other ministries. So there is no one pool, no one budget where we can say, okay, it's this climate budget and therefore an integrated approach, all the ministries are allocating under this climate budget and we get to know this is the climate budget for India. So that's not happening. If we can really have that kind of an exercise also and a demand, and an ask from the government, if we can really have a budget code, or if we can have a budget like climate budget or disaster risk reduction or DRR and CCA informed budget, that gives us a clear picture as to what are the allocations by various ministries for climate change adaptation and risk resilience. So equity and inclusion should definitely drive development of this country, and development can only happen when DRR and CCA is kept in mind. So that's what I would like to end with.
Thanks, Lee. Very, very helpful and to the point. Sure, I think we'll together work on this. So towards the end, Dr. Tathagat, will you also have any further recommendations moving forward?
Yes. I would follow from where Mihir ji and Lee has said. So, obviously, all these issues are extremely important. So, I would put another dimension to it, again, looking from the urban lens. And see, we have to recognize the livelihood dimension to both the climate change risks and the disaster risks. What we need to take into consideration when we think about building climate resilience and disaster risk reduction, we need to factor in its implications on the livelihood aspects. Because that, and as Lee has very rightly mentioned, that we need to put the issue of equity at the center. Definitely that is so. Here in the urban context, if we look in the COVID situation, the people who had most suffered are the urban informal sector. People who had been associated with the urban informal sector has been the worst hit in the COVID crisis. The COVID crisis has also brought out the dimension that we are more and more integrated in a network between urban and rural. So when an urban India it's impacted by COVID, it has its repercussions in the deep interiors of in the rural India as well. So we need to take into consideration the integrated dimension of the threats, and we need to factor in the livelihood aspects. Because for both climate change and the disaster risks, the people who are at the bottom of the society, the urban poor and the marginalized, they are the most highly impacted. So that aspect we need to take into consideration. And secondly, we need to take into consideration the link between the urban and the rural. So we need to go beyond the dichotomy of the urban and rural and see both as an integrated part of a spatial development framework. As India is shifting from rural to urban, so there are interlinkages, and those interlinkages needs to be strengthened. We cannot think about this being an urban threat, that being a rural threat. So so we need to think more of in an integrated manner. So that would be my point.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Thagat. I think it's indeed make a very interesting set of recommendations for all of us moving forward from here. And it's also already time for the session to an end. But before that, I once again check with our participants if anybody have any question to ask, or I will request my colleague Ritika to conclude it with the final vote of thanks. And from my side, I think thanks to Mihir Bhai, Lee, Dr. Tathaga, Dr. Anil Gupta, and also Harjeet, who could not join us, and all the participants for taking our time to be there with us. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ritika, for hosting. Over to you.
Thank you, Vikrant sir. It was indeed a lovely conversation amongst all of you. Our work is definitely cut out. We know what to do from here, and the fact that this should be something that we should be doing every year will actually improve on it. I completely agree with that. I would just like to go ahead and give my thanks to all the speakers that have been here today. Dr. Mihir Bhatt sir, Professor Anil Gupta, Ms. Lee McQueen, Dr. Chatterjee, and obviously also Mr. Harjeet, who couldn't be here due to family emergency, also him. And last but not the least, Vikrant sir, thank you so much for hosting such a wonderful session. We hope to continue, have a series of discussion on this to improve on CAA and DRR. Thank you so much. We'll be coming back to you with another topic of current affairs to discuss with you. Good day. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Good night.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody, Vikrant
Thank you.
Bhai, Ritika.